Arkham Asylum is a place filled with mystery and horribles and creepy crawlies and mad scientists and professors of all kinds. And sometimes people in very themed jester outfits who like to wear a lot of makeup. I don't know which one I've brought with me today to talk to all this, but I'll leave it up to him to decide. But for the first time on this channel in a while, for eagle-eyed listeners, you'll remember we did a long time ago an episode talking Damien and Kara, like an issue about that. But in the revamped rebirth Geeks for Fun, this is going to be the first time he's on the channel, and I'm very looking forward to it. The one, the only, Sid Part 2.
Hi, everyone.
How are you, man?
Oh, I'm doing good. Excited to be here, like helping out. I like branching out, doing videos on other people's channels. It's fun. It's a novelty.
This is all I am.
Most people I know don't upload anymore, so, you know.
It's just an area of YouTube that's been undiscovered and left to rot, much like the topic of this video.
Right. Yeah, Arkham Asylum. For me, Arkham Asylum is this interesting thing that's kind of been tied into really me and comics since the beginning. I've told this story several times, but I started reading comics, came out of the theater on either Batman Begins or The Dark Knight. I can't even remember anymore. Went to my local library, started reading all the trades that they had collected, and it was all the famous stuff, your Year One, Dark Knight Returns, all that. But one book that I kept hearing was really, really good, but I could never find it anywhere, was Arkham Asylum. So it was by Grant Morrison. So it was the first trade I went and bought for myself. And
really?
Yeah, and ever since then I've kind of been in love with Arkham Asylum. I've had very strong opinions on Arkham Asylum. I remember at one point asking my comic shop guy, who's like, oh, if you want to be like a completionist for a character, I can do that. You tell me you want anything with Superman in it, I can get it for you. And I asked him, can you get me anytime Arkham shows up, even if it's just in a panel somewhere? And he's like, no, I can't do that. And I was very disappointed. Arkham's kind of my thing. If it's got Arkham in the title, I've probably read it, with the exception of some of the video game tie-in stuff. Because
I think that's a good place to take it as well, because Arkham, you mentioned as well, this guy saying, oh, any character, and your first thought is Arkham. It really is almost a character, even deciding its namesake, Amadeus and all of that. Just discarding them alone, the building itself, sometimes even when it's an island or sometimes it's much smaller, it has varying depictions. It seems to change as much as Batman and become part of his world as much as any other member of his rogues gallery, because it causes him just as much problems.
Oh, certainly. It really has taken on a life of its own, to the point where there's this really great story. I can't remember maybe it's Monick, Doug Monick, I think is how you pronounce his name. There's this great story where a guy gets admitted to Arkham, and the narration is the asylum talking to him, and it's terrifying. It's got a 2-page spread in the middle of it with all the inmates going out into the streets to cause chaos, and it's do you see my vision now? And it's just terrifying. The asylum is a character unto itself, and it's kind of brilliant.
And that's why I've also, not as much as you, but I've leaned to Arkham a lot as well. Maybe it's just because of my British roots and stuff, but whenever I see Arkham, it does feel like it's Victorian architecture, which I've seen a lot of cathedrals and places around England where I could just say, oh, that would be a great Arkham Asylum if they used that in the movie or something. It's just, no matter what Gotham looks like, it's very rare. The inside of Arkham might be changed a lot. It could be clinical. Sometimes it'd be a lot more high tech. I think in the current rebirth, for what little we see of it, it is very high tech. But the outside is always this horror of Gothic Victorian architecture, which I think is really interesting to have that be such a fixture of a mainstream character.
And that kind of ties in it's this weird thing because it was kind of just always done that way because it's got that haunted house look, and then you got Morrison who comes around and kind of gives a story reason for it that even gets translated onto Gotham City, which is the Gothic architecture was purposefully implemented to keep the demon in, as Amadeus Arkham put it, to keep the madness and the evil locked inside. It's and so you'll get like it's not a great series or anything, but in Jeff Johns' Earth One, you see a map of the interior of Arkham Asylum, and it's like this spiraling maze, this labyrinth that's like meant to keep these evil spirits or what have you locked inside its walls. And it's that right kind of creepy and weirdness. And I love it.
And that's something I feel like maybe taking this into more like different directions of where that's been lost is something like Nolan, which is a big exposure to a lot of people, or even just what's another good example? Even the Batman the animated series never really went too far with it. Do you feel like when they just make Arkham the place where the supervillains are kept, you're missing something special there?
Oh, definitely. Like, the animated series does a little bit better of a job with it, but I think to really get Arkham, you gotta do a story where Batman's in it. Like, if your thing doesn't have Batman be, essentially admitted to Arkham, you're kind of losing the character of the thing. And so if you're telling a story about Arkham and it doesn't really have Batman inside the walls properly, you lose a bit. And so, yeah, like Nolan, it's just a big prison. It doesn't really have much character unto itself. The animated series does an episode where Bruce is staying inside the walls because he's like undercover and stuff, and that gives it a little more character, but it's mainly just a set piece. Like, you just see it as like a kind of establishing shot, and then maybe we spend 2 or 3 minutes in there. The Batman did a better job at giving us just more time inside of Arkham, but it mainly just treats it like a prison. They don't do a great job. Like, yeah, I'm really racking my brain here and trying to think of other media that actually transitioned and made the Asylum a character. And really the only thing that's come to mind outside the comics for me is maybe the first game. Yeah. And even then it's not super explicit.
See, my thing with that is I've recently played through all the Arkham games, and while the first one does have a lot more of it, it very much feels like this is the baby steps to a lot of different things. Like, the tone of that game, I think, is something that captures a lot of, specifically Batman in Arkham, a lot better than other things do. Is like, you get to walk around that place, and even the really high-tech prison places, like the super like maximum security wing where Killer Croc and everything kept, they're all dilapidated and covered in filth, and like no matter how much money Wayne Tech puts into this thing, something always goes wrong. It's like, you listen to some of the nurses and stuff, and they'll be like, yeah, we just got this new wing installed and it's already breaking, it doesn't make any sense. Like, I like that idea to it, is just as much as the villains he fights is like Batman will throw them and beat them and they'll come back and adapt and something. No matter how much Batman tries to reform Arkham itself, it adapts to it and gets worse. Like, that's a really good idea, which I think is only in the video game, because I can't recall, like, I don't ever feel people, it's either one or the other. It's either super gothic or it's super high tech. I like the balance.
That's a really good point. The balance in the game is, it's got like this sense that they're adding on to it. And it also, it's worth remembering that it was Amadeus's family home and he turned it into an asylum. Yeah. So you do have these sections of the building that are, or sections of the campus, I guess you'd call it. They're like, yeah, it's got a garden. And that's probably a weird thing for an asylum to have, but not for like a Victorian style family to have on their property. That kind of makes sense. So yeah, I guess the way I think about Arkham is kind of, it's Wayne Manor, but everything's awful. Because we tend to do that with Wayne Manor a lot, where like whenever we need something, there's just, a room for it in Wayne Manor and or the Batcave. And I tend to think that Arkham's got like kind of a similar thing. Whenever we need something really messed up, there's a room for it in Arkham. And to that point, one of the things I did really respect about the game, even though it's a bit, it walks the line really well between a super contrivance for a video game and a really great story moment. And that's that Batman has a little miniature satellite Batcave in there. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, it like adds to the fact that, of course, he'd be planned for something like that. Is like, if I'm going to be an Arkham and this is where everyone else, like, this is where the Joker's base is basically, this is where Scarecrow's base is basically, fuck it, I'm going to put my base here as well. Which then adds to some of the things you get into with, like, the old tired trope of, is Batman as insane as the villains he's fighting? Yes, it's been done to death, but there is still something there you can play with, even just to debunk it. If you have Batman set up a Batcave in Arkham and like one of the villains finds out, that's there immediately. It's like, oh, you couldn't resist coming here.
I do really like that idea, and it's kind of just the idea that who's really in there at that point? Who's the one in prison? Is it the prisoner or is it the guard? Because you got someone like the Joker, and he just considers Arkham home. Which, I mean, to be fair, I guess I didn't really think of fan films. The Joker blogs did a really good job of giving Arkham a lot of character for a fan series, especially when you get to the finale, where the Joker does all this stuff just to ensure that he always gets to stay at Arkham, and he gets a little sign that says "Home Sweet Home" in his cell. And it's like, it's the right level of creepy. And it just really works in that way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think maybe that's somewhere to go with this is, I'll ask you, do you think, because he's kind of like owned it as much as anyone else has, do you think Arkham should exclusively the Joker's Batcave and everyone else gets to rent a room? Or do you think it should be more of a everyone has their own separate wing, or people fight for control of Arkham?
I like the idea that the Joker's just made it his home. He's just kind of like come in and kind of become the alpha of the place.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I kind of like the idea that the Joker's a puppet too. He can just see the strings. Like he knows his role there. So he just kind of embraces it, but he doesn't have necessarily any more control over Arkham than anyone else. And that's where you get some of the more interesting stories, when you got like Arkham Asylum Living Hell has its moments that get kind of interesting. I like the way it ends, even though nothing was done with it. Like that's got some cool ideas to it. But I don't know, just the Joker owning Arkham can get kind of ridiculous. Like, in his 12-issue series from like the 70s, he's got a button in his cell that opens the floor and goes down to essentially his Batcave, calls his Hacienda. And that's like, that just goes maybe a little bit too far. I really like the Joker just sitting in his cell waiting.
Yeah, that plays a bit better. Especially, I think a moment like that works in like a story. Like maybe during one of his stays in Arkham, he does that for a gag, but you can't have him keep that.
Yeah, it's too much, right? Yeah. Like, I guess this becomes a question, because it's something I've thought about before, but do you think, now that we're getting more like R-rated superhero movies and stuff, do you think you'd want to see a like really intense like Arkham Asylum in an R-rated Batman movie? Maybe
right.
Like as the main focus and setting of the story?
So that's the thing. I don't know how much you kept up with this. Like, I was just literally about to ask this, is apparently the Batman script Ben Affleck himself was working on, that he was going to direct, was going to be that. It was going to be Batman in Arkham Asylum, based off the novel, based off the graphic novel, and based off the game slightly with its own thing. Something related to Deathstroke meant he had to go in Arkham Asylum. It was going to be this big thing with all the villains, but with a very personal Batman POV focus, and then that got scrapped for whatever Matt Reeves is doing. So we almost had that, and I don't know how you feel about that.
It's the DCEU. We almost had everything. I don't really know how to react to that, because that sounds really great, but that's what I was saying about like every piece of news I heard about the DCEU. Everything was great in concept, none of it was great in execution. Would I like that? Would I like the story where Batman has to go in Arkham and have that be the movie? Yes, because how many times have we seen him save Gotham City? It gets old after a while, and Batman's got one of the greatest rogues galleries in comics, and they all, for one reason or another, even if they're not actually criminally insane, end up in Arkham Asylum. So why not have them? Why not have Arkham Asylum just like be the setting of a film, and then you can do all the bad guys in one movie and have it feel like it's got a lot of stakes, and do a really personal story with Bruce Wayne. I think that all sounds great. Whether or not I trust the DCEU to do it, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. Part of me, again, is like, that would be a really good idea, because some of like Ben Affleck's other takes, like, I think most people can agree, at least in Batman vs Superman, like, as awful as that film is, the guy's at least really trying with his performance there to, even if the material's not that good for Batman, it's like, you can see if in other hands he could have done a good job, and throwing that guy in Arkham and then seeing where that goes could have been good. But even aside from that, I do think somewhere else I'd like to see this explored is not just in live action, because I think you'd really need like, I think the biggest mistake in like Batman's career is that we never got to see Tim Burton's Arkham. Like, what would that have looked like?
Yeah, we only get those little glimpses of it, and it's weird and trippy and fun.
But and then like exploring that kind of more, okay, Arkham is hell on earth. Let's just go forget the realism. Let's just make it an actual madhouse. Let's go full force with the animation a little more with this. With stuff like Spider-Verse really playing with the visuals, I feel like if you wanted to go, I don't even know what a good example to be, but like if you just make it like a fever dream, like how the original graphic novel is with the art, that could be something interesting where you almost make it a visual experience.
I would so be there for it. I think that could be great to do an Arkham story that's really, really dark and trippy and very experimental with its animation. Because there's some stuff out there that's like super weird. Like I'm thinking like your Pink Floyd The Wall kind of animation that's just like meant to be trippy and scary. That could be a great setting for an Arkham Asylum story. And I don't necessarily know if WB's animation department for the direct-to-DVD movies could pull off something like that. But if you did like a feature film that way, that could be really, really trippy and cool.
Or even something like, because I feel like a strength of Arkham is not just in grand epics. It's really good for one-shot stories. So I can see, like, DC was doing this a little while back with the Superman 80th, I think it was like 75th actually. And they did like a really great animated short of like Superman's history. And then they did like a Batman short by Bruce Timm of like set in the Golden Age. I could really dig a 5-minute animated, really trippy, surreal Batman just short. It's set in Arkham, and I feel like that's an avenue we haven't really explored, because you could do one for every villain with a different art style.
That could be really, really great if you did something like the Joker's Asylum series, if you were to adapt some of those, or maybe straight just rewrite some of them because some of them suck. But like that was a really mixed bag, and it's because it had none of the same creative team issue to issue, which was kind of the strength of it. Like that could be really interesting, because I remember like the Killer Croc story was so interesting, because it started off with Croc like in his cell, and he was just ravenous and chained up, and his therapist is just sitting there trying to get through to him. Is like, Waylon, you can't keep diverting to these animalistic tendencies. We need to treat you like a person and get you actual treatment. Otherwise, we're going to just have to keep you chained up like an animal if you continue to act this way. And then Killer Croc like bites off his own hands in order to get at his therapist and kill him.
Oof.
And then he escapes and he regrows his hands, which is trippy and weird, but it works. And he ends up getting taken advantage of by these two people who, like, at first they act like they like him for who he is, but then it turns out they just use him as muscle to kind of move up the crime ladder. And then he ends up, they get busted. He ends up back in Arkham. They sell him down the river saying it was all his idea. And it just ends with Croc chained back up in his cell, and now his hands have like clamps over him so he can't bite him off again. And you just got Joker from across the cell block laughing at him saying, "You thought someone actually loved you? Ha 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 ha." And that's how the book ends. And like, yeah, that'd be a great like 10-15 minute Arkham Asylum story with Killer Croc as the main focus, because just everything about that is centered on just how awful that place is. And that's where every story starts and ends for a Batman villain.
Which I feel like is a good place to end that on, because we've been kind of like hyping up how much the awfulness of Arkham leads to really good stories. Do you feel like Arkham Asylum being so awful and being such a literal hellhole, does it diminish Batman's mission or effectiveness or like the idea of him? Does it make him seem more of like just an asshole who's not changing anything? He's just sending these mentally deranged people to this place where they're gonna end up worse.
Okay, here's the thing. As bad as Arkham is, Gotham's worse. Like that's the really interesting thing to me. And I've always kind of attached this quote to Arkham Asylum, which is, judge the quality of your society based on the quality of its prisons. And so like Arkham is a reflection on how bad Gotham is, because Arkham's the place you go to for help in Gotham City. And that's the crazy part. And so it's a complicated thing. I don't put that on Batman because it's really our fault as readers that Arkham's as bad as it is. We if anyone goes out and buys the Batman comic where Arkham successfully rehabilitates someone and it works well and there's no drama and everything's just fine, then maybe if that issue sells 1 million copies, maybe they'll do that every week. But we all know that's not going to happen, because it's more entertaining, it's more fun if the comics, if Arkham's a hellhole and it just makes people worse. I'm doing this video right after I read Grant Morrison's Animal Man, where like Grant Morrison talks about, oh yeah, I killed your wife and children because it made it more entertaining. And it's like, that's just kind of where I'm at. It's like, I'm sorry. Fictional characters, I feel bad for you, but it's more entertaining this way.
That's a good point as well. It's just, I feel like DC's maybe trying to do that, given how little we're seeing of Arkham getting a big focus. It's always normally background information, albeit like you compare Arkham to any other supervillain prison and it's not even a contest. Like Marvel's got the Raft, DC's got Blackgate as well, and other kind of places like that, but they all have no character. They're just default prison. And that's why it upsets me where in the majority of outside media, apart from the comics, that's what Arkham defaults to. But hopefully we're starting to see a change in that. Even if by the time this is recording, like the week of this, we'll get to see Tom King do like a Batman versus Arkham story, which will probably like change how we view Arkham now, because that man is just as crazy as anyone in Arkham. But yeah, I'm glad we managed to touch on a lot of topics on this, because we could just go on forever talking about like Amadeus and stuff, but the building itself is layered and used a lot of. There's any recommendations Ian's just given throughout the course of this podcast, you can really just go and check out for yourself. And I'd recommend just playing the game, not for the story, but just like walk around, feel in the place, because I think that's a really like, it's rare you get to see a backdrop in a superhero thing with so much character.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I lost my shit when I found Amadeus Arkham's cell in that game. I couldn't believe they included that.
Yeah. But yes, thank you for joining me, Ian. It's been an
Oh, no problem.
absolute pleasure having you on. Again, make sure you can check out Ian's channel on Geek Gentleman. I'm there now and again, doing his dirty work for him as his humble ward. But now he's my ward on this thing for whatever time we have left. But yeah, most of all, hope you've enjoyed, folks. Link for that will be in the description, and take it easy.